I'm Jim Zarin, President of City Club, and I welcome you all. Those of you here at the Governor Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB FM or KBPS AM radio or watching on cable television. Thank you for joining us for this week's Friday Forum on this, the 6th of February, 2009. Our program today is entitled Making the Invisible Visible, and will feature a presentation on Portland's Native American community by the Executive Director of the Native American Youth and Family Center here in Portland. But before we begin our program, I have a few announcements. First, in consideration of those sitting close to you and those in our radio and television audiences, if you've not already done so, please silence your cell phones and any other devices that might make noise. We are pleased to acknowledge our 4 Friday Forum corporate sponsors for this quarter, without whose generous financial support these Friday Forums of City Club would not be possible. Our 4 corporate sponsors this quarter are Girding Eadlin Development Company, Pacific Power, The Standard, and UBS, and particularly in these difficult times, we very much appreciate their continuing financial support. Thank you very much. We have 2 new members today who I'd like to stand and be recognized. First, Rudy Soto, who is a student and former student body president at PSU. Rudy, and welcome. And Judy Shiprack, Multnomah County Commissioner, is a new City Club member. Welcome, Commissioner. Now, next Friday, February 13th, City Club will welcome to our Friday Forum a panel of experts who will describe the growing need for long-term care in our state and country. The panel will address how Oregon's unique home and community-based care system is now being threatened. 2 weeks from today, on February 20th, Jonah Edelman of the advocacy group Stand for Children will make the case for how Oregon's legislature can continue to move our state's schools forward despite the economic downturn. And then to close out the month, on February 27th, Portland Mayor Sam Adams will give his first State of the City speech as mayor here at City Club. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, February 25th, City Club's Agora Committee will welcome to Citizens Read, our book club, author Brian Doyle, who will discuss his book, The Grail, which leads its reader on a cheerful tour of winemaking in Oregon's Lang Vineyard. You can purchase discounted copies of the book from Cynthia Townsend at the back of the room. From Agora for this event, please do so. Now, for details and information about all of these and other City Club programs and opportunities, please look for upcoming City Club bulletins or go to the club's website. Now to our program. Depending on how you count, there are approximately 50,000 to 80,000 Native Americans currently in Oregon, somewhere between 1.5% and 2.5% of the state's population. Native Americans live in all 36 counties of Oregon, and about half are from Oregon tribes. Approximately 38,000 Native Americans live in Multnomah County alone, representing an amazing 380 tribes. Our speaker will give you more information and more statistics. But yet, other than a general awareness of Native Americans being part of our state's history, of course, and knowledge of the resort at Canida and certainly the casinos at places like Grand Ronde, Lincoln City, and Canyonville, many Americans, many Oregonians rather, if not most Oregonians, on a day-in, day-out basis are fairly unaware of the presence of or of the lives of the Native Americans living in our midst. And certainly many of us Oregonians are unaware of the major challenges that the members of Oregon's Native American community, our fellow Oregonians, often face. Although the state's Native Americans make up only 1.5% or 2.5% of the state's population, as mentioned, they account for 10% of the state's homeless population. Oregon's Native Americans also are substantially overrepresented with respect to rates of incarceration, foster care, unemployment, and poverty, as well as rates of addiction, depression, and diabetes. And although state statistics are not available, nationally the Native American community is underrepresented in high school graduation rates and has the lowest median income of all racial and ethnic groups in the society. Now, perhaps most troubling of all regarding these kinds of statistics is the fact that the numbers often involve significant undercounting, resulting in a phenomenon of invisibility that both masks the seriousness of the issues and undercuts efforts to address them. and what is being done to address the serious issues facing the Native Americans of our country and our state and our city. Despite the invisibility problem, are there no effective programs? Are there no successes? Indeed, are there no reasons for hope? Well, today's speaker is well equipped to address this important subject. As the Executive Director of Portland's Native American Youth and Family Center, or Nigh, since 2001, our speaker has worked during her entire professional career to improve the lives of Oregon's Native people. Born in Ketchikan, Alaska, she grew up on the Siletz Indian Reservation here in Oregon. After graduating cum laude from Oregon State in Corvallis with a double bachelor's degree in public health and American Indian Studies, she went on to receive a Master of Public Health from the Mark Hatfield School of Government at Portland State. She is the member of the Tlingit and Haida Central Council of Southeast Alaska and has over 10 years of experience in planning and implementing culturally specific education, social service, housing, and poverty reduction programs for Native American families. She also serves on several boards, including those of the Northwest Health Foundation, the Portland Schools Foundation, and the National Urban Indian Family Coalition. Now, on a personal level, our speaker is informing that she's the proud mother of a 5-month-old baby, a baby who is part Navajo, part Omaha, part Tlingit, and part Irish. She's also told me that her first job was cleaning fish in Southeast Alaska, that her second job was as a sandwich artist for Wendy's fast food chain in Newport, Oregon, and her third job was serving as a member of the Lincoln County Summer Litter Patrol. Now, she contends that she was equally unskilled at each of these first jobs she has, but given her track record since, my guess is she's simply been being humble and probably did a great job on those jobs as well. In any event, please give a warm City Club welcome to the Executive Director of Nigh, the Native American Youth and Family Center here in Portland, upon her first visit to this podium, Nichole June Maher. Nichole?
Klahauya, Katamaika, Kanawainaika Telekums, Gunaschish. I've greeted you and welcomed you in the Chinook language, which is the language of the Multnomah people, of whose land we're standing on today, and I've thanked you in my language, which is the Tlingit language. It's a great honor and a great privilege to be here with you today. I'm so pleased to be a guest of City Club, and I'm so pleased to see so many members of the Native community in the audience today. I've been a member for many years. Melody, I hope you're pleased to know I recently rejoined, and I've never seen so many people from our community, and it means the world to me to have you here and be in support, so thank you. I want to start with a small disclaimer. I am one of the 38,000 Native Americans living in Portland, and I am a member of one of the 380 tribes. So I am from one worldview and one perspective, and I certainly do not speak for all Native Americans. I'm simply here to talk about my experience and what I've learned in my 8 years of serving this community. Just as we would never claim that all people of European heritage living in this community would have one perspective and one voice, the same is true for the Native community. We have many different opinions and worldviews, and so we really celebrate that diversity within our community. Again, I was born in Ketchikan, Alaska, and spent most of my life in Siletz, Oregon, and so I'm a relatively new urban Indian. But urban Indians do comprise the majority of Native Americans in this country. So often when we think about Native Americans, we think about people living far off on reservations. We think about the images we see on television. The majority of those images depict Native Americans 100 years ago. It's very rare to see a Native American on television today in everyday clothing as part of today's society. When in reality, 65% of all Native Americans in the United States live in big cities. In Oregon, 80% of all Native Americans live in Eugene, Salem, and Portland, with, of course, 70% living in Portland. In reality, our community is growing, we're thriving, and we're really reinventing ourselves in today's world. And I want to talk a little bit about that. Most people, wherever I go in the United States, seem to have some awareness of how large Portland's Native community is. And yet in Portland, people seem to be surprised over and over again to find out that we are, in fact, the 9th largest Native community. You live in Indian country. You just may not realize it. I also want to talk about some of the history that our community has experienced. To truly understand who our people are and what our experience has been, it's really important to know where we've come from. Now, we have a really hard history in Oregon. And I'm not going to talk about the history of genocide. I'm not going to talk about the period of disease that this community faced. That's very important, and I really encourage and hope that you will learn that as part of Oregon's history. I'm actually going to talk specifically about the last 60 years in this community, because while some of those policies were much more subtle, they were equally as impactful to our community, and they've shaped how our community lives here in Portland today. And so I'm going to share that with you today. Some of that information is going to be difficult to hear. It's painful, it's frustrating, it's shocking, but it's really important that we share that with you. It's really important that all Portlanders understand the Native community's experience, not just the Native community. I oftentimes wonder when I speak about these issues if it's too hard to hear. Will people shut down when I share this information? But I think the truth is too important, and I believe that all of you in this audience can be our allies and to help remedy myths and stereotypes, and I believe it's important for you to know this history as well. Before I talk about that, I want to talk about some of the current dynamics of the Native community and why it's important to know this information. Oftentimes, folks say, why is the Native experience important to me? Why do I have to understand this? Why is it relevant? Well, we are a large community, and I've shared that, but more importantly, we are a growing community. There's 38,000 of us that live in Multnomah County, but 50% of our population is under the age of 25. The average size of a family that we serve at Nigh Family Center is 5 children. We have more children than any other ethnic group in this community, and so we're growing. We're part of Portland's future. Additionally, as was shared in the introduction, there's a lot of challenges that our community faces. There's some staggering statistics out there. But rather than being depressed about the difficult data that our community experiences, I think it's important to think about how it connects to you. For those of you in this room that are passionate about children in foster care, that means that you're passionate about Native American children, because we are 1 out of every 3 children in foster care in Multnomah County. For those of you who love to advocate for housing, that means that you are advocating for our community as well. While Native Americans experience the greatest poverty rate and the highest homeless rate, we have the least access to low-income housing programs, and while we have the lowest homeownership rate, we are the least likely to get down payment assistance in homeownership programs. So if you care about housing, you definitely care about our community. If you're one of the people in our community who advocates for education, who wants to improve our schools, then you care about Native American children as well. While Native Americans are only 4% of Multnomah County's population, 10% of the children in this community have some Native heritage. We have one of the highest dropout rates, and we're one of the largest populations of youth that's out of school. And so if education is the thing that you care most about, you definitely care about Native American children. At this point in kind of any discussion that I give, people say, so there's so many Native Americans, there's all these pressing issues, why haven't I been more aware of this? Where have they been? Where do they live? And today's great because I would say close to half of the people in the audience are part of the Native community or connected to the Native community, so today's a great representation. But there's some very good reasons why our community has been so invisible. And part of it has to do with that really hard history that we've experienced. Our community has been fearful for some very good reasons and has, in a lot of ways, chosen to remain invisible, in some ways to protect ourselves. There's been a lot of issues around identity in this community and who can and cannot identify as a Native, who is recognized as a Native person by the federal government, and who is not recognized. So this is a point where I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the difficult history in the state of Oregon. To start with, Portland has always been a very large and diverse Native community. Prior to European contact, there were at least 40,000 Native Americans who lived in this community. So we've always had a large, rich, and diverse community. I mentioned before there was a very difficult period that took place, and I'm really going to focus on the last 60 years. So how did Portland become one of the largest, most diverse Native communities in the U.S.? Well, there were a lot of very specific federal policies that created this large, diverse community. The most important of which was the Federal Relocation Act. This act started in 1954 and lasted until 1979. And what this act did is it essentially, the United States government had decided that Native Americans were not assimilating well enough, and it essentially went reservation by reservation and did a forced lottery and forced families to move to one of 7 large urban Indian communities. It gave them one-way bus tickets. It gave them 2 weeks of job training and placed them into low-income housing. Portland was one of those 7 cities. The other important piece about this legislation was it took families and it removed them as far away from home as possible. This has a great impact on our community today. Today, what is our largest tribe? The Turtle Mountain Ojibwe from North Dakota. And so that act brought us many, many people to this community. And it was a very hard and difficult time for those folks when they came to this community. In addition to that, we have the longest continuously operating federal boarding school in the entire United States right in our backyard, Chemawa Indian School in Salem, Oregon. For over 100 years, we've had Native people relocated to this community for many years against their will, coming to school here, and many of those people decided to relocate and stay in this community. Additionally, the Federal Termination Act, which began in 1954 and still is continuing to this day, most impacted the state of Oregon. And what this act did is it selected tribes for the intended purpose of assimilation, and it essentially terminated their entire status as an Indian nation. No longer sovereign, the folks who were members of those tribes could no longer identify as Native, and they lost all of their land. This began in 1954. The first tribe to be re-recognized was the Siletz tribe in 1978. The last tribe to be recognized was the Coquel in 1989, and we continue to have tribes that have not yet been recognized in the state of Oregon. What this act did is it devastated those tribes. But additionally, it changed the face of Oregon because most of the tribal members from those communities were forced to move away from their communities. And so today, 40% of the Klamath tribe lives in Portland. 30% of the Grand Ronde tribe lives in Portland. And so it's made us a much more urban community. The other piece that was very, very important, and I really want folks to recognize about this particular act, is that this is in our lifetime. So often when we think about Native Americans, we think about this long ago history. Well, the years that I'm discussing are all things that have happened while we've been alive, and there's certainly things that the grandmothers, the parents, and the children that we serve every day at Nigh have experienced. 2 really important things happened in 1978 that greatly affected the state of Oregon. One was the passage of the Indian Child Welfare Act, and that was a very positive law. What's really important to talk about is why that law was passed. Prior to 1978, it was a policy of the United States government and of the state of Oregon to remove Native American children from their homes, not based on any neglect or abuse, but simply based on their race, purely for the purpose of assimilation. Some of the tribes in Oregon and around the United States had as much as 50% of their children removed and adopted out into non-Native households. That act devastated our community. In addition to that, it created a great fear that our community has, a great fear of government organizations, majority culture organizations, and an overwhelming sense of mistrust. So when I was introduced today, it was mentioned about some of the undercounts. And I like to talk about this particular act because it really helps people understand why some people still to this day, even though they are grounded in their culture and very proud of who they are, will still choose not to identify as Native. They are still fearful that their children will be removed from the home. And when we look at the current day data, when 34% of all children in foster care are Native American in Multnomah County, I would say that our community has a good reason to be fearful. The other act that happened in 1978 that was very positive was the Freedom of Religion Act, the Native American Freedom of Religion Act. Prior to 1978, it was illegal for Native Americans to practice our religion. Having a sun dance, having a feather dance, holding a potlatch, all of those ceremonies were absolutely outlawed in this community and across the United States. And so when this act was passed, and Oregon actually played a very big role in the passage of this law due to the court case Smith versus Oregon, it was very important to our people. And so when you see our community fighting with so much tenacity to hold on to our culture, to hold on to our religion, and hold on to our values, it's important to recognize the very big battles that our elders and our leaders have fought so that we can practice these values. And I think it's very important for every resident and citizen of the United States to know this history because we are so proud to be Americans and have the Constitution that we have. It's important to remember that not every person has had the same rights. So I know those are hard to hear, but it's really important to me that you all have this information and that after I speak today, you're really armed with this information and that you share it with everyone that you know. I really consider each of you to be our allies, and I consider that each of you will do a lot of educating after today. I also want to break down some very commonly held myths about the Native American community. The first one, and I get this every single day, everywhere I go, is that we get all kinds of money from casinos and gaming. I'm not an expert on gaming. I'm not an expert on casinos. I would really recommend, if you want all of the detailed data, to go to the National Indian Gaming Association's webpage. What I can tell you, though, is that for the vast majority of Native Americans, in fact, 95% of all Native Americans in the United States never see a dollar of gaming revenues. The reality is that gaming is an important economic industry in our communities. They add a lot to the economy of the state of Oregon, and I certainly support and respect the work of all of those tribes that are on that endeavor, but it has also created a lot of misperceptions and stereotypes for our community. For example, the organization that I serve, we receive less than half of 1% of resources from tribes and gaming revenues. I'm very comfortable with that. I think that's very appropriate. However, there's not a day that goes by that myself and my staff are not confronted with this stereotype of, you guys have all kinds of money from gaming revenues. So I think that's really, really important. The reality is that Native Americans live in the greatest poverty of any ethnic group in this country. And so while gaming is very important, it certainly has not resolved all of our community's challenges. The other big myth and stereotype that exists that heavily impacts our population in Portland is this idea that if you're Native American, you should have all your services paid for by your tribe. We certainly do not tell people who are of French heritage that France should pay for their services. Native Americans, we live in this community. We pay taxes. We're going to stay in this community. We should have equal access to any service or program that any other person in this community has. And so that's a big myth and stereotype we work to overcome. The other misperception out there is that Native Americans are getting tons of money from the government. I keep waiting patiently, but it has not happened yet. And that's just a very big myth that exists. I think it's really important also to look at philanthropy. Harvard did a study in 2005, and what it showed is that in all philanthropic giving, Native Americans received 1/20th of 1% of all giving. What was even more, it's very difficult to calculate. I think it's like half a penny of $1. And, that's pretty disturbing considering we're nationally 2% of the population and certainly the needs that we have. But more importantly, of the resources that were given to Native Americans, the majority went to universities and museums to do research on us. So the resources weren't actually coming to our community. Now, I see this actually in a little bit of a positive way because my perspective is you really can't get much worse than that. So we should be able to get a lot more resources in the future. The other stereotype that we face regularly is that all Native Americans are alcoholics and that it's a genetic issue. This is not true. There's no scientific evidence to say that alcoholism is genetic for our community. And Native Americans, like any other population that faces great poverty, loss of hope, and has had a systematic stripping of identity, certainly has challenges with addiction. That is true. But if you took any other population that had a similar experience, they would have a similar rate of addiction as well. So at this point, I'd like to move on and really talk about the future for our community. We've had a lot of really fantastic things happen in the last several years. And while we faced a lot of really difficult challenges, we've really begun to come together as a community, find our voice, work together, and build our community based on our own values and our own belief systems. I want to share some of the accomplishments that we've recently had as a community. In the past 8 years, we've worked very hard to build a coalition of young people and elders to create a multi-generational advocacy group to really work on addressing poverty. This is the Youth and Elders Council, and they have worked very hard to be recognized as an equal within the Neighborhood System Association. And they have an average attendance of about 120 individuals every month. They're very engaged, they're very involved, and I have never seen our community have such a truly connected group of young people working with their elders. We have more Native Americans serving on commissions and boards than ever in the history of Portland. We've had the first Native American appointed to the Portland Planning Commission, and we have 2 Native Americans on the Human Rights Commission, and many, many other organizations. The Native community has worked very hard to work with over 40 other culturally specific organizations to build the Communities of Color Coalition, who is working very hard to advocate and demand equity for all people of color in this community. In addition to this, Portland and Nigh received a very special honor this last year. The Gates Foundation was working to select one educational program in the entire United States and actually selected Portland because for a 4-year project, the Native community was actually able to raise the graduation rate by 10% in Portland public schools. I have to be honest, it went from 24% to 34% over 4 years, which we still have a long way to go, but it was a very concrete, measurable impact, and we're very proud of that as a community. In addition to that, last year, a 35-year goal of creating, running, and operating our own Native American school that honors the family, the culture, and the traditions of the Native American community was opened, and we now have over 100 students attending school and doing very, very well. Another important community accomplishment that we have is that in 2004, we had more voters than we'd ever had before. We had 10,000 Native Americans vote in 2004. In 2008, we had 12,800 Native American voters. So if you pay attention to local elections, there's a lot of elections won by 3,000 and 4,000 votes. So we know that the Native community is having a very, very big impact, although I believe we are truly underestimated. The Native American community is also somewhat of its own industry in this community. We have 25 Native organizations located in Portland. We have national organizations, regional organizations, tribal organizations, and 2 community-serving organizations. The collective budgets of those 25 organizations is $50 million. $50 million of jobs, goods and services we're buying. And the other piece that's very important to note about that is that the majority of those dollars are coming from outside the state of Oregon. So we have our own economic force in this community, and I think it's time that our community is recognized for that. There's certainly great need, and I don't want to give the perception that we have enough money or enough resources, but it's a great start. Another great success that our community has come to in the last 2 years is the creation and the distribution of the document that you all received a copy of today called Making the Invisible Visible. This was an effort by 24 Native organizations that came together and worked for 18 months to build this document, to gain consensus on every single word, so that we can tell our own story about who we are, what our priorities are, and how we see ourselves as part of this community. We worked collectively to write it and to publish it, and now we're working collectively to share it. And as a result of this effort, the Portland Indian Leaders Roundtable was formed, an organization that meets monthly so that all of the Native organizations in this community are working together to build a plan about what we want for our children's future. Portland is definitely a fascinating place, and I feel truly fortunate to live here. I feel fortunate to live in a community with a thriving, robust, diverse Native community, and I feel fortunate to live in a community that shares a lot of similar values with us. When I think of Portland, I think about the values that our residents have. They're passionate about the environment, they're passionate about being inclusive, they're passionate about truly involving all of the community. The thing that I find interesting is a lot of those values and beliefs are the same beliefs that the Native American community has. We have strong values of humility, of respect, of reciprocity. We have an amazing system of redistribution in our community. And I think we have so much to add and to give to the rest of Portland. So my question is, how do we make that connection? If these are the values of Portland, and if we have this rich and diverse, powerful Native community here, how do we celebrate that? How does everyone in Portland become proud of that? And how do we get the rest of Portland to support the Native community and see our issues as their issues and to join in and assist us in overcoming some of our challenges? I believe that everyone can play a role in supporting the Native community, and that by doing this, ultimately Portland will be a better place. So I've tried to think of some specific ways that individuals can support and help the Native community. Of course, the first, and if you're here or if you're listening, you're already doing this, but learn more about the Native community. Interrupt stereotypes when you hear them. Correct false information. Be part of the solution. Tell people that Multnomah County has 38,000 Native Americans. Tell people there are 380 different tribes, different cultures, different languages, and remind them that they live in the 9th largest Native community. Make sure that you are actively recruiting and hiring Native Americans in your organization and in your business and the businesses that you go to. I have 91 employees, 85% of which are Native American, 96% have a 4-year degree, 40% have a master's degree. I have one lone PhD on my team. And every job that we seek to hire, we have lots of qualified Native American people. And I think that all of your organizations and businesses could benefit from having them as part of your team. Make sure that your elected officials are being conscientious of the Native community and including us in decisions and in process and in policy. Support Native American programs that have a proven track record of success. We know that there is this large Native American community, and we know that there are fear and mistrust issues. We know that culturally specific services are critical to our population being served and that they must exist in order for this vulnerable population to be served. Be a champion for equity and make sure that all vulnerable populations, not just Native Americans, are being considered and truly included in any solutions that are developed. Whatever boards and commissions that you serve on, there should be a Native voice. We are a large enough community that our voice needs to be included, not just as a token, but as an equally valued voice on that board or commission. And lastly, always think about your own sphere of influence and the impact that you're making in your daily actions and how you can impact the Native community as well. I think I'm ending early. I got the okay sign from the back. In closing, I actually want to leave you with some words that are not my own. These are the words of the Making the Invisible Visible document. These are the words of 24 different Native organizations, their leaders, their board members, and our elders. And these are the words of our Native community that we want the rest of Portland to know about us. Despite the barriers, we continue to foster our culture and celebrate our heritage. We are successful contributing members of the city of Portland. We pay taxes, we volunteer, we vote, we share our heritage, and we care about the collective future of our children and of this community. Some of our most important work revolves around preparing our youth to become the future leaders of this city, their tribes, and our community. We are passing on our many strengths and assets. We serve the community and we help each other. As distinct as urban tribal peoples may be, we have a collective vision of what we want for our children and families. We want to be recognized and treated with respect. We want our cultures and religions to be valued and treated equally. We want safe, affordable housing. We want access to employment. We want equal opportunities for quality education, and we want to build a strong and vibrant community. We have important and diverse Indigenous worldviews and contribute to the livability and the uniqueness of Portland, and we see ourselves as part of the future. Thank you.
The first question of our speakers always will be from our Board of Governors host. Our board host today is Elizabeth Riley. Liz Riley currently is the Major Gifts and Capital Campaign Director of Planned Parenthood Columbia Willamette in Portland. She has been a City Club member since 2006. She serves as chair of the club's membership committee and has been a member of the Board of Directors since 2007. Liz?
Thank you. So you've spoken today about some identity myths. And Portland is a city, as you've mentioned, that I think largely prides itself on appreciating difference. But I'm wondering if you think this is really true, or is this another identity myth that we tell ourselves?
I really appreciate that question, and I'm going to be very honest. We have a lot of challenges in Portland pertaining to race and our acknowledgement of the racism that exists in this city. Portland oftentimes, I think it's confused because we are large, mostly liberal, mostly democratic, and most of us greatly value diversity. And so we trick ourselves sometimes because we say, this is our identity, this is who we are, I'm not racist, it's someone else. And yet we live in a community that, when you look at the data, may tell us another story. Why is it that there is such a huge achievement gap between white students and children of color in this community? One of the largest achievement gaps in the country. Why is it that in this community, people of color are so much more likely to be homeless and to not be served in that system? Over and over again, if you look at the data, it will tell us a very, very different story. And so while I think each of us is very well-intentioned and we want to do the right thing, I think that we have to start acknowledging that we do have some challenges. There is racism towards Native Americans in this community. I've been called a squaw in this community. I've been, certainly experienced other things. But that type of racism is actually the type of racism that I'm less concerned about. I'm much more concerned about the very subtle, indirect ways where our community is excluded. And I also get very concerned when I talk about some of this data, some of the inequalities that exist, and sometimes it feels like we just accept that. It's been that way for a long time. No one's really outraged about it. And I think everyone in this room should be outraged that out of every 100 Native students, only 30 are going to graduate. I'm outraged. I want other people to be equally outraged. I don't understand why folks are not outraged that 1 out of every 3 children that's in foster care is Native American when we're only 4% of the population. And other ethnic groups in the city face very similar challenges, and I'm outraged on their behalf as well. And I think that as a city, we need to really address some of those issues and just be more honest with ourselves. So.
This is the time we take questions from the floor. Asking questions at Friday Forum is a privilege of City Club membership. Please limit your question to 30 seconds. Have it have a question mark at the end, and we'll end at about 1/4 after.
Bob Geary, member. My question is about teacher education, because that's what I was in a former life. What strategy or what programs do you have for those of us that went through those universities and became teachers?
Well, this is actually an area where we're fortunate in Oregon, because we actually have several specific programs, one in Ashland, one at the University of Oregon, one at Lewis and Clark, and I believe Portland State University is attempting to do this as well, but to build specific programs that teach and prepare Native Americans to become teachers. We have, in all of the districts combined in Multnomah County, we have less than 20 Native American teachers, which is very, very upsetting. So there's good work being done to create new qualified Native teachers. We're very fortunate at the Nigh Early College Academy that 7 of our 9 instructors are Native American. But we do need support and help from those who do have lots of experience in teaching and instruction to come and volunteer and support and lend their knowledge and expertise to the teaching staff that we do have. So I hope that answers your question.
Actually, my question was the impact on those of us that get educated. My generation, and I speak as an alum of San Jose State University, I got nothing, and my field was social studies. So my question isn't that emphasis, it is what strategy do you have for training us? What programs?
Well, there isn't a program to date, but we love to come and train teachers, to talk with teachers. We don't get invited very often to do it, but I know that myself and my staff would make ourselves available to come to any opportunity to teach or instruct teachers. We have about 100 students that attend school in our academy, but we recognize that there are thousands of Native children that are going to all of the other schools across this community, and we need any opportunity possible to teach and to train. There are some national programs that do training and curriculum with teachers, but I don't know of anything locally, so it would have to be a grassroots effort, but we're certainly open and willing to come and do that, so we can connect afterwards.
Hi, I'm Peter Fenner, member of the City Club, and thank you very much for all the data that you've provided. Like it or not, one of the things that's most non-Indians in this state are aware of is casino gambling and the issues surrounding that. It seems as though, based on your data, that most of the Indian population, or Native Americans, excuse me, is right here in Portland, and it seems therefore it might be a good idea to have the casino, if there is to be one in this area, right here in Portland, where it can be reached by public transportation and not out on a dangerous highway out on 84. Could you comment on the position, your position, or the position of the Native American groups here to having it in Portland, and if you're in favor of it, what are the obstacles that you face in trying to make that happen?
Well, that is an impressively difficult question. Well, I can't speak on behalf of all Native Americans, and I cannot speak on behalf of all of Portland's community. And I'm sure, as there are 38,000 Native Americans, there's probably 38,000 different perspectives on bringing gaming to Portland. I think that my position would really depend on the organization of the casino if it were to come to Portland. So I apologize to dodge this question, if you will, but it's a very complicated subject. So if it were a collaborative gaming enterprise that included all 9 tribes, that could benefit all 9 tribes, I might have one opinion on it. If it was one tribe that was opening a casino within the city limits, I might have another opinion on it. And so it's not that easy of a question to say I'm for it or I'm against it. So I apologize, I don't have a good answer for you.
Joyce DeMonin, City Club member. Thank you very much, first of all, for the history lesson. It was very illuminating. I have a special interest in the elders of your community, and I was wondering if there are any special needs. Question number 1. Part 2 would be if you can expand a little bit more on your multi-generational program, because I think that's fabulous.
Great, thank you for that question. We have a lot of challenges in our community pertaining to our elder population. In some ways, we are one of the richest communities in this area because we have elders who are truly engaged, are part of all of our programs, volunteer in fantastic ways, and are truly supportive of the work we're trying to do with youth. So we are very fortunate in that way as a community. Some of the challenges that we face is that, first of all, Native Americans have the lowest life expectancy in the state of Oregon. If you're a Native American man in the state of Oregon, your life expectancy is 47 years old. It's about 43 in the country of Zimbabwe, so we have a lot of challenges. So that's something that needs to be addressed, but what that creates is a lot of false perceptions in the sort of arena of aging and disabilities that there aren't a lot of Native American elders, when in fact there are quite a few Native American elders. The challenge is that many of our elders have lived through some of the most difficult and challenging times and are very fearful to identify and come forward. So that challenge is then compacted by the fact that what aging services there are out there, most of our elders will not participate in. So there are, for example, senior service centers, but you'll rarely, if ever, see our population go and access services there. So there's really distinct cultural needs that our population has. And I think we're working very hard to partner and to overcome that. We recently worked in partnership with Multnomah County and PSU to do a survey, and it was really hard to see the results. For example, the survey didn't ask if they were homeless or not. It just asked what kind of housing they lived in. And we had several elders who were homeless, several elders who had great needs but weren't receiving any support. So we have a long way to go. The area that we have been really, really successful is the engagement of elders in all of our programs. Since we have very, very minimal programs for elders, what we've basically done is incorporate elders into every other program that we have. So we might have a middle school talking circle. Well, guess what? We're inviting elders to that. We're picking them up. We're bringing them and asking them to participate and giving them a very important role. It's very rare to come to any program in our building or any activity and not have very deep elder involvement, and we found that to be most successful. We do still have a lot of needs and areas to improve in as far as shut-in elders, elders who need meal service, elders who need help navigating and doing paperwork and all of that. So we've got a long way to go, but we have a great foundation to build on.
Thank you, Nichole. Jay Bloom City Club, you've shared about your excellent work at your organization, and thank you for that. Could you share a little bit more about some of the other organizations that serve that community?
I would love to. One of our strongest partners and a really amazing asset that we have in Portland, and an organization that I would give a lot of credit to for a lot of the success of our organization, is the National Indian Child Welfare Association. This is a national organization that serves over 500 tribes across the United States as well as in Canada, and essentially doing training, policy advocacy work, some of the very most important policies that are passed on the national level that impact all of us, they've done. On a more local level, they've actually done some amazing evaluation and program design work for NAIA, and we probably would not be able to be as proficient about bragging about our results if they hadn't been very helpful to us in really analyzing some of that work. And the other thing that's important to recognize is that NICWA, their organization could be located anywhere in the country, in DC, in Denver, but they choose to have their headquarters in Portland, Oregon, bringing lots of jobs and resources to this community. So that's one organization. We also have a really wonderful Portland Indian Elders Association that meets and connects and socializes and supports a lot of the youth and other community activities in the community. There's a lot of really small, amazing grassroots groups as well, and I'll just point you to the back page of the Making the Invisible Visible. There are the names of the 24 organizations that participated in all of their contact information, and so we are very fortunate in that aspect as a community. So thank you for that question.
Jeannie Crouch, City Club member. Thank you, Nichole, for your very educational and articulate presentation. I really appreciate you being here. My question is, if you could advise Sam Adams and Ted Wheeler on the 2 or 3 things that they could be doing for the Native American community that would really make a difference, that would really have a lot of leverage, what would you ask them to do?
Well, I would ask both of them to really do a very thoughtful and systematic analysis of where the greatest needs are in Portland and where the resources are going. I certainly have a lot of ideas about very specific things that I would like to see done, but certainly I'm most concerned with the City of Portland and Multnomah County about the equity of resources and how they're distributed. So I'm concerned about that for juvenile justice. I'm just concerned about that in aging and disabilities. I'm concerned about that in the Bureau of Housing. You name the department, there are great inequalities. For some reason in this community, we like to say that we're data-driven. We like to say that we're focusing on the greatest needs. And yet, when you really look at the data and when you really look at the greatest needs, oftentimes where we invest does not match with who are the most vulnerable citizens of the community. So if we were actually able to really assess that and to look and to make the commitment to truly put the resources where the greatest need is, the Native community would see a very significant impact and a great increase in the equity of resources. I would also recommend that both of them look long and hard at their hiring practices and really assess how they can hire some qualified Native Americans to not just be employees, but to be senior and upper level managers. There is a great underrepresentation of our population in those high level decision-making positions within the city and the county. And I've only been in Portland for 8 years, but mid-level and upper-level managers have an unbelievable level of power in making decisions about how resources are allocated and policies and programs are designed. And we don't have any representatives at that level. And so our worldview and our values are not represented in that way. So that would be another recommendation.
Thank you.
Jewel Lansing, City Club member. I have two short questions. One is the data that you spoke about, I thought at first was about Multnomah County, and then I see on this brochure it talks about Portland, so I'm wondering which it is. The other one is what does it take to qualify as, what are the criteria to be considered Native American?
That's a great question, and the data is very confusing. So there's lots of problems with how we identify and how the census counts Native Americans. So, for example, on the census, because I am two different tribes and also Irish, I'm not counted as Native American in the census. I'm counted as multi-ethnic. And so when you do a search for Native Americans using the census, you have to ask the right questions, and you have to be really clear about what populations you're defining. And so if you do one race only, which typically will count people who are only one tribe, and most likely 100% that tribe, you're going to get a much smaller number because we have very few people who fit into that category. If you broaden your search and recognize people who are two tribes, most people, when we think about someone who's two tribes, you would think, oh, they're Native American. But according to the way that the data is counted, they would actually be multi-ethnic as well. So we have a lot of work to do to resolve that. And so certainly if you count for the PMSA, which is the Portland Metropolitan Service Area, which is 3 counties and part of Clark County, you count people who are more than one tribe, you'll get 55,000 Native Americans, and so on and so forth. So it's pretty tricky, and you can get probably about 10 different options for counting Native Americans if you really work at it. And that creates a huge challenge for our community because depending on what person at what time who is collecting data to make a policy decision, if they do the wrong search, they could get a very low number of Native Americans and formulate an entire service allocation based on that number that would greatly impact our community in a negative way. And I've seen it lots and lots of times. So that's why it's so important that we educate and get out there. The question of who qualifies and who is considered Native American is very complicated. And there are lots of different definitions. The federal government has a definition. The Bureau of Indian Affairs has a definition. The definition that the federal government and the Bureau of Indian Affairs does not match the definition that the Federal Department of Education has. And the thing that is really tricky is that Native Americans are not necessarily a race, even though that's how we're often categorized. We're really a political group and an ethnicity. You can have someone who is half African American, a quarter European, and may identify and be very proud of those cultures, and they may also be an enrolled tribal member and identified politically as a member of a sovereign nation in this country. The piece that makes it even more complicated is that we have something called blood quantum that is not a traditional value. It's not part of our tribe's worldview or our traditions. It's something that was imposed on us by the U.S. government. And it was imposed on us in order to exclude people from qualifying as Native Americans so that the U.S. government would not have to live up to their treaty obligations. It's very interesting if you analyze how blood quantum was used to exclude Native Americans for the purpose of not serving them, and blood quantum was used with African Americans for the purpose of including them for discriminatory purposes. It's very interesting to analyze that, but it's very complicated. So today, every tribe has the right to determine its own enrollment criteria. So we have young people that we serve at Nigh who might be 3/4 Native, but they might be 6 different tribes, so they're not eligible to enroll in any tribe because they might all require a 1/4 blood quantum. We have families that their tribe requires you to be born on the reservation. So the first 4 siblings were born on the reservation, they're enrolled. The last 4 siblings were born in Portland, they're not enrolled. So it's very, very complicated. I hope that helps. I may have just confused you a lot more.
How about 164th? That's what it used to be in Montana on the Flathead Reservation. To qualify for free milk was 164th.
Well, there's someone in the audience who is from the Flathead Reservation, and I'll hook you up with her after this, so she can update you on that. There's 565 tribes across the U.S., and I do not know each and every blood quantum requirement. I apologize.
Virginia Cornyn, City Club member. Your first recommendation as to how we could help was to learn more. Do you have some relatively easy resources for those of us who would like to learn more, either books or websites that might help us begin to understand more about the Native communities?
Absolutely. There's a wonderful book called Oregon's First Peoples to help you understand the history of the 9 federally recognized tribes. There's also a website for the National Urban Indian Family Coalition, which has several fantastic publications about some of the amazing work that's happening nationally. I would invite each and every one of you, if you'd like to come on a tour of Nigh and learn more about our community. We're located on Columbia Boulevard, and it's quite fantastic because our building is actually on a traditional Multnomah Chinook village site, the Nir-Chokiku village site, so it's quite beautiful, and that's a great way is to come out and meet the community. So those are 3 suggestions, and I have more.
Well, we've run out of time for further questions. We need to stop. Please join us at next week's Friday Forum to hear a panel to address the challenges facing Oregon's system of long-term care for our state's aging population. My guess is, as long as our speaker is around and active, that the invisibility of this problem will be a little more visible. She's a great spokesperson. I'd like to, as we close, thank her for being here today. We're adjourned.